Inner Chaos by Grevin Hades. Chapter 4, Magical Intervention. Everfree Forest, Castle Ruins, early morning hours. Pain, burning, searing pain is what Fluttershy's body felt at that moment. When the wave of magic had washed over through the room, it shook loose several stone columns, shattered windows, and caused weak stones in the ceiling to fall. When she saw the column begin to fall where Twilight and Applejack were, she had tried to call out to them, and thankfully Rainbow Dash had pushed them to safety. But unfortunately, she had stopped, watching her surroundings had been caught by a large amount of glass and rock falling on her from above. She had managed to roll to the side when the debris had first hit, but this resulted in a piece of glass driving into her side and into her chest. A heavy ceiling stone had landed on her right rear hoof, snapping it, and another small stone had landed on one of her wings, breaking the light bones inside. Her entire being quaked with fiery pain, and all she could do was whimper as she struggled harder and harder to breathe. Tears began to flow as she tried to move, only to feel more pain shoot through her. Thankfully, she saw Rainbow Dash rush over to her after the dust had settled. "Oh, help me," was all she could squeak out with a weakened voice. She shivered, feeling a cold chill begin to move through her. She looked up at her friend as she began to worry about what would happen to Angel and all the animals she was taking care of. Who would feed them, take care of them when they were sick? Rainbow trembled as she looked down at her friend. "Okay, it'll be alright, Fluttershy. Twilight can get these stones off of you and get you to Ponyville where Nurse Redheart can fix you right up." She tried to give Fluttershy her best with a shrinking smile in an attempt to calm her, while Twilight and Applejack galloped over. Twilight bent down and began to look over the situation, while Applejack gently held Fluttershy's hoof. She smiled reassuringly and nodded. "Alright, all I have to do is levitate these stone blocks off you and teleport you straight to the hospital." She braced her hooves and lowered her head and began to concentrate, making her horn glow with its usual color. She focused on the first large stone she could. At first, it began to glow with the same aura as her horn. Then after a few moments, the aura began to shift and dull in color, before fading away, leaving Twilight to stare in pure shock. Rainbow frowned as she jumped over to the stone to take a closer look at Twilight's horn, her eyes showing her concern and frustration. "Twilight, what happened? Move the stone quick. We need to get Fluttershy out of here." Twilight narrowed her eyes as she planted her feet once more and began to concentrate. Things once again appeared normal with the glow surrounding her horn, but this time there was only a brief aura of color before appearing around the block before it suddenly dissipated with a flash. Twilight stepped back, sinking to a sitting position, her eyes wide with disbelief. I don't understand. I'm putting all I have into it. The stones must have had some kind of magic enchantment imbued into them that keeps them from being manipulated by unicorn magic. After our encounter with Nightmare Moon, the power of the elements must have made it that much stronger than normal." Applejack frowned as she squeezed Fluttershy's hoof again. She gently set her friend's hoof down before stepping forward to the pile of rubble. "Then we'll just have to move these by hoof. With Dash here and I, we'll have these cleared out in no time." She quickly turned around, prepped and gave the hardest buck she could into the top rock, causing it to shift and move somewhat, but not enough to free. Fluttershy, Applejack growled and bucked once again. This time, while it moved, Rainbow Dash pushed it with all she could, her wings flapping violently, the gust kicking up small bursts of dust that dissipated into the air, causing the heavy load to shift and tumble to the side of their fallen friend. Applejack grinned in victory, but stopped just as quickly as she started taking note of at least two other large stones atop her friend. Not being one to quit, she turned and prepared to strike once again. Grevin winced as he felt his head throb in a pounding headache, and his body ached like he had just been put through a meat grinder. Bringing a shaky hand up to the back of his head, he cringed when his touch brought back a sharp pain, blurred vision, and a bit of nausea through his system. The last thing he could remember was hiding from some ponies and touching a symbol that matched his armor exactly. Glancing around, he found that the room he was in had changed considerably. Columns had toppled and windows were shattered. He grunted as he forced himself to sit forward and move to his knees, his voice shaky at his hands. What the hell hit me? He braced his hand against the rock column he rested against, slowly pulled himself to his feet, pushing down the intense feeling of nausea and dizziness as he rested against the cool surface. Once he had his feet under him, he rose up and popped his neck once before turning to look over the main chamber, and the sight that greeted him brought back a sick feeling in his stomach. Across the room, 3 ponies stood over their friend who had become trapped under some rubble and was badly hurt. He could see the worry and fear in their eyes of the 3 friends as they tried to free their friend, who, if he was right, was in worse shape than she initially appeared. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him as he stepped back, realizing that this was all his fault. He growled in frustration at his own stupidity that resulted in this. If he had simply stuck around to explain himself when he first encountered the one he had heard them call Applejack, then he wouldn't have run off, been followed to these ruins, and never messed with that damn tile that shook everything loose. He stepped forward hesitantly into the dim light of the chamber, knowing he had to make things right. Rainbow Dash and Twilight grunted as they pulled at a particular stone, while Applejack pushed hard with her back legs. They'd begun to move the stone, tilting it awkwardly when Dash's grip slipped, causing her to fly backwards in an uncontrolled somersault. She gritted her teeth and winced, expecting to slam into a stone wall, but instead she felt a pair of arms wrapping around her waist, just under her arms, pulling her into a soft, cushioned surface. She slowly opened her eyes, letting out a quiet sigh. She was about to thank Twilight for stopping her when she saw that Applejack and Twilight were still working on that rock. She began to tremble as she lowered her gaze, taking note of the large pair of gloved hands sticking out from under her arms, holding her. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt her fear rise. Grevin blinked as he got a closer look at the pony he managed to catch. She was light, very light, especially considering she was a little shorter than him, most likely being shy of 5 feet tall when on all fours, and very close to his height when on her back 2 legs. She trembled as she began to realize just what was holding her. He couldn't help but smirk, knowing that she was about to get the spook of her life. Rainbow Dash's eyes twitched as she trembled, feeling the soft rumble of a deep laugh against her back. Slowly she turned her head around and gasped when she saw the thing they had been chasing holding her, its shadowy face staring down at her. Dwight! Grevin sighed a bit and set the blue Pegasus down. I'm not going to hurt you. He moved forward with careful steps and maneuvered around Twilight, and took a firm grip of the stone, grunting as he pulled it loose and away from Fluttershy. Twilight, upon seeing a large pair of hands wrap around the stone, pulled back in fear, her eyes going wide as she watched the stone be pulled aside by the creature they had been trying to track down since that evening. With the first stone removed, Applejack moved on to the next one, only to feel a soft pat on her shoulder followed by a voice she had not heard before. Please, let me. It was deep, strong, yet gentle and calm. She turned around and stepped back upon seeing the same creature who had helped Applebloom earlier, stepping past. Twilight, who along with Rainbow Dash could only watch in awe as he began to move the rubble at a fairly quick pace. Fluttershy, upon seeing the imposing figure begin to loom over her, felt the familiar strong grip of panic clutch at her, causing her pupils to shrink. Despite the pain of her wound, she tried to move away, but stopped when Applejack placed a hoof on her shoulder and looked down into her blue eyes with her calm green ones. Shh, it's okay, Shorty. I don't think it's here to hurt you. Fluttershy shivered but nodded, trusting her friend. Her eyes drifted back to the tall being moving the rubble off her. The pressure from the weight beginning to lessen, allowing her to take deeper breaths once again. As the last piece of rock was removed, she gave a soft, gentle smile that was so typical of her. She looked up into the shadowed hood that hid his face and spoke in a weak whisper. "Thank you." Grevin simply nodded at the pale pony, not wanting to distract himself from his task. He had seen the blood before he had begun moving the rubble, but now that it was clear, he knew that things were far more grave than they had first appeared. She had a piece of glass lodged in her side, and once it were removed, the flow of blood escaping her wound would rise exponentially. He frowned as he pulled his gloves tighter on his hands and knelt down before her. Twilight frowned as she stepped over to the Applejack, a tear coming to her eye as she checked over Fluttershy. "Hi, Celestia. Fluttershy." She glanced at Rainbow and Dash and Applejack. "She needs the doctor. I don't know enough of the kind of healing spells she needs." Rainbow Dash frowned as she stepped forward. "Lift her onto my back. I'll get her to Ponyville in no time." Twilight shook her head. "No, Rainbow. We can't move her like this, and I'm not even willing to risk a teleport." Grevin sat there looking at the pony, shaking in fear as her life was being drained away from her. He reached down and gently took her hoof in his hand, giving her a soft, reassuring squeeze. He looked over his shoulder at her friends and cleared his throat loudly, interrupting their conversation. "I know I haven't made the best first impression to any of you, but please, allow me to help." Applejack froze a moment and turned to face him. "Wait just a darn tootin' second. You mean you helped my sister, didn't you? After the fire? You helped her get better?" Grevin simply nodded to Fluttershy. "I want to help her. All of this is my fault. If I had simply stayed put and not run away after our first altercation, this all could have been avoided, and your friend wouldn't be hurt. So please, let me help her." Twilight and Rainbow both gave a smile and nodded in agreement. Applejack did as well and stepped back to let him work. Grevin closed his eyes and began to concentrate, allowing the magic to once again flow from within him. He felt a familiar sensation flow through his fingertips as the red orbs embedded in his forearm guards began to glow in all too familiar fashion. Moments later, his hands began to take on a soft, eerie, bluish glow. He reached down and gently took hold of the glass shard embedded in Fluttershy and allowed the glow to move over it before slowly pulling it free. Twilight watched with fascination as she watched the glow enveloping the glass, pushed the blood from Fluttershy's wound, keeping it clean and open without causing more harm. The very essence of the magical energy he was emitting was cleaning her wound and repairing every bit of muscle, bone, and skin. Grevin grunted as a familiar pain began to form in his chest, but he wouldn't let that stop him. He tossed aside the piece of glass, shattering it on the floor, and placed both his hands on the now open wound. The glow from his hands suddenly brightened as he concentrated, his teeth gritting as the searing pain began to flow from his chest down into his abdomen. Applejack, Rainbow Dash, and Twilight couldn't believe their eyes as the color began to return to their fallen friend, and her once broken wing had straightened and folded back into correct position. They could only watch as he continued while Fluttershy's leg began to straighten and then twitch as the bone mended. Twilight was beside herself, amazed with this kind of magic. She had never seen anything like it, and couldn't take her eyes away. If she had, perhaps she would have seen the small trickle of red beginning to run down Grevin's waist and drip onto the ground, mixing in with what was already spilled. Grevin felt fire in his chest, and his breathing felt labored. He growled, refusing to allow the pain he felt to keep him from finishing the task he had set for himself. He wouldn't allow himself to relax until it was finished. The red gems on his forearm guards flared up once again, filling the room with a brief flash of crimson light, before it was replaced with a nearly eye-searing white luminescence emanating from his hand over the closing wound. Within a few minutes of the whole thing starting, the light from his hands began to fade, the magical energies returning to whence they came, leaving the room in the dim light of the morning hours just before sunrise. Grevin pulled his hands back into his cloak, revealing Fluttershy's side to be completely healed and unscathed. He quickly clutched his sides as he breathed heavily, hunching over only to find himself being supported by a massive orange. Applejack had seen him begin to tip and had managed to maneuver herself under him quickly enough to keep him from falling into the now drying pool of crimson at their hooves. "Easy there, partner. I've got you." Grevin nodded and quickly reached up, pulling his hood down further over his face, a habit he tended to have. "All right. Is she all right?" Fluttershy slowly put her hooves underneath her and rose up to a standing position, a look of wonder on her smiling face. "Yes, I feel great. I haven't felt so good in a long time." She fluttered her wings for a moment and stretched her legs out one by one. "I think you even got rid of an achy knee I received when I lifted too much animal feed last week." She turned her head to Grevin and gave a bright smile. "Thank you so much. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped me." Grevin took a shaky breath and nodded. "Don't think anything of it. I caused all this trouble. It's my responsibility. I need to make it right, no matter the repercussions." Rainbow narrowed her eyes, suspicious at the words he used. "Wait a minute. What do you mean by that? It sounded a little shady." Grevin shook his head, raising a hand to cover his mouth as a deep, ragged cough swept through him. He did his best to cover his mouth as he coughed, but as he pulled his hand away, Twilight saw something that made her eyes widen and her coat turn pale. There was fresh blood on his gloves. She moved closer, her eyes narrowing in concern, then noticed that his other hand was still clutching his side, as a bit more blood seemed to gently flow from under his armor and shirt to the ground. She quickly reached a hoof out to push his hood and cloak back to get a better look, but was caught by surprise by a rather sharp slap to it from Grevin, who quickly pulled back, moving on to his rather shaky legs. She frowned, ignoring the slight sting on her hoof again, and moved forward, only to have him step back. "You're hurt. What did you do? Let me see." Grevin raised a finger, waving it back and forth while shaking his head. No, it's nothing personal, but..." He coughed violently again, this time hunching over and nearly falling to his knees as more blood fell from his lips. "But it's a personal rule of mine. I don't like to show my face. No one sees it unless I want them to." Twilight and Rainbow Dash growled as she pawed the ground. "You just helped one of my best friends, pal. Now let us help you. Don't be so stubborn." She launched herself into the air and moved at Grevin, trying to use her teeth to catch his hood as he pulled it back. Grevin quickly ducked, causing Rainbow to barely miss him as she shot past, and quickly limped to a still stable column where he rested his bag against it while facing the four ponies. "It's my decision. My right." He took a short, gasping breath. "Oh, damn it." He let out a groan as his head fell back and his legs went limp, forcing him to slide down the column to the floor, and then falls to the side, unconscious. Fluttershy was the first to reach him, followed by Applejack and Twilight, while Rainbow watched on with a scowl at first, and then a look of concern. "And I thought I was stubborn." Twilight took a moment to look at the creature before them, then looked at Fluttershy, who had tears in her eyes as she rested a hoof on the fallen man's arm. "Fluttershy, do you think you can fly?" Fluttershy quickly stood, flapping her wings at the moment, and gave a curt nod, her mind already knowing what Twilight was going to suggest. "Good. I want you and Rainbow to carry him to Ponyville, with each of you carrying an arm and me using a force field to protect him. We can get him to the hospital and hopefully save him." Applejack turned to her friend with concern in her eyes. "Twa, what about me?" "Applejack, you're one of the most dependable ponies in Ponyville. It's up to you to make sure we abide by his wishes. Don't let anyone, except Nurse Redheart, see him without his cloak of his." She turned back to face the fallen being in front of her. "He showed us compassion and honor by helping us.